In the living room, bathed in a warm golden glow, a piercing scream shattered the silence. "You're not my mother. I will never accept you." 12-year-old Ethan, his eyes swollen with tears, hurled the family photo frame to the floor, shards of glass scattering with a sharp crash that echoed through the house. His father, David, froze in place, torn between rushing to his son or protecting his new wife. Linda, the woman who had just stepped into their lives, stood still in the middle of the room, her hands trembling under the weight of Ethan's hateful glare. The air turned unbearably heavy, like a storm brewing inside four walls. Outside, neighbors laughed and chatted in the evening calm, but within this house, an invisible crack was deepening every second. Could a stepmother ever break through such walls of prejudice with nothing but kindness and patience? Or was she doomed to remain forever an outsider in her own home? In a quiet American suburb, rows of neat houses lined the street, each lawn trimmed to perfection, each driveway echoing with children's laughter in the afternoons. On the surface, everything looked like a picture of the modern American dream. But inside house number 27, the air was heavy, as though a silent storm lingered, waiting to break. 12-year-old Ethan carried a wound too deep to see. His mother had died of a cruel illness, and every corner of the house still whispered her memory. His father, David, a hard-working man constantly buried in his job, believed he was providing stability, yet he didn't notice that Ethan's grief had hardened into silent rebellion. In his loneliness, David remarried, hoping to rebuild a complete family for his son. Linda, his new wife, was gentle, educated, and truly believed that love could mend broken hearts. She never wished to replace Ethan's mother. She only longed to walk beside him, to care for him with patience. But reality was harsher. In Ethan's eyes, Linda was an intruder, someone occupying his mother's seat at the table, a shadow he would never accept. Meanwhile, neighbors praised the family as lucky, never realizing that behind closed doors, a battle between love and prejudice was quietly escalating. Ethan, 12 years old, stood at the very center of this story. Bright, sharp, and more sensitive than most kids his age, he carried a void left by his mother's death. A void he tried to shield with defiance, stubborn silence, and sudden bursts of anger. In his eyes, his father's remarriage was a betrayal, and Linda, the stranger who stepped into their home, was undeserving of the word mother. In contrast, Linda embodied patience. In her mid-30s, she wasn't the ambitious, hard-edged type, but a woman defined by quiet gestures, a lunchbox packed with care, a book placed by Ethan's bedside, a smile offered even when rejected. Deep inside, she longed to build a real family, not to replace anyone, but to nurture a new beginning. Yet the more she tried, the colder Ethan grew, and every small rejection cut her deeper. David, the father, was a complicated figure. He loved his son, but also craved a partner to share his burdens. He wanted harmony, yet often chose silence or sternness instead of patience, only widening the gap. Around them, neighbors whispered, reinforcing the old prejudice. A stepmother can never truly love another woman's child. These three souls, bound under one roof, each carried their own wounds. Their differences were not just quirks of personality, but sparks of constant conflict, testing the fragile line between resentment and love. Each day inside that house felt like a silent battlefield. At the dinner table, Ethan avoided Linda's eyes, banging his spoon against the plate just to shatter any attempt at conversation. The meals she cooked were pushed aside, replaced by fast food he grabbed to spite her. When she tucked a lunchbox into his backpack, he made sure to toss it into the school trash can before stepping through the gates. Once, during a family walk in the park, David reached out to hold Linda's hand, and Ethan bolted forward, shouting loudly to his friends, "She's not my mom!" The words froze Linda in place, her smile collapsing, while David was left speechless in embarrassment. Every kind gesture, helping with math homework, stitching his torn jersey, was met with a glare or cold silence. Ethan wasn't just rejecting Linda. He was guarding the memory of his mother, afraid that opening his heart would mean betraying the woman he had lost. Behind his anger lived unspoken grief. And though Linda understood, each dismissal was a knife that cut deeper, wounding her desire to love the boy she called family. The conflict reached a boiling point when an incident at school exposed the fracture for all to see. Ethan had been bullied by classmates who mocked him for having a fake mom. Linda rushed to pick him up, only to have Ethan wrench his arm away, yelling across the crowd, "I'd rather walk than go home with you." Laughter rippled through the other kids, turning Ethan's shame into a scar he would carry, while Linda stood frozen, her heart tearing at the seams. That night, David's patience snapped. He scolded Ethan for his cruelty, but the rebuke only drove the boy deeper into isolation. Ethan slammed his bedroom door, shouting, "No one understands me!" The house grew heavy, its silence filled with tension so thick it seemed to suffocate. David, trapped between wife and son, tried to restore order, but each word he spoke only made the rift wider. Linda swallowed her tears, questioning herself in the dark. Was her patience worth anything? Was she doomed to remain the unwanted replacement no one had asked for? This was no longer just a clash between two people. It was a war between memory and presence, prejudice and trust, pulling the family apart into three lonely fragments under one roof. One winter night, with the wind howling outside and bare branches rattling against the windows, Ethan was struck by a sudden fever. His small body shivered, drenched in sweat, breath coming fast and shallow. David was away on a business trip, leaving only Linda at home. In that moment, every wall, every wound she had endured seemed to dissolve, replaced by the instinct of a mother. Panic surged through her veins as she placed cool cloths on his forehead, dialed the doctor, and refused to leave his side. Through the long hours, she whispered gently, "You'll be okay, sweetheart. I'm right here." Half conscious, Ethan clutched her hand with surprising strength and murmured a single word she had never dreamed of hearing. "Mom." For Linda, the sound was like lightning splitting the night, painful and beautiful, a spark of hope piercing the darkness. For the first time, the fortress Ethan had built around his heart showed a fracture, a space where love could seep in. When dawn broke, soft light spilled across Ethan's pale face. His eyes fluttered open, and the first thing he saw was Linda, still at his bedside, dark circles under her eyes, her hand still wrapped tightly around his. For a fleeting moment, her presence no longer felt like an intrusion but a shield, a quiet safety he hadn't noticed before. Memories of his harsh words, the rejected meals, the cruel glares replayed in his mind. And for the first time, he felt uneasy with himself. Linda, exhausted but steady, managed a weary smile and whispered, "Do you feel a little better now?" Ethan didn't look away. He simply gave a small nod. It wasn't surrender, it was acknowledgement. He could see it now. She wasn't trying to replace the mother he had lost, but quietly filling the emptiness with a love that asked for nothing in return. And in that morning silence, the long war between resentment and affection tilted at last toward the light. In the days after his fever broke, the house still carried a quiet caution, but something subtle had shifted. Ethan no longer avoided Linda, and though his words were few, the sharp edge in his eyes had softened. One afternoon, when David came home from work, he stumbled upon an unexpected sight. Ethan sitting in the living room, sketching with unusual focus. But it wasn't superheroes or video game characters that filled the page. It was a family portrait. 3 figures seated at a dinner table, each one smiling. Linda stood beside David, and Ethan sat between them, holding both their hands. When Linda walked closer, Ethan froze for a moment, then shyly pushed the drawing toward her and whispered, I drew this for you, Mom." Linda's breath caught, her eyes flooding with tears. unable to believe the word she had just heard. David stood motionless, his throat tightening with emotion. In that simple drawing, he saw proof that kindness and patience had finally torn down the walls. The sketch was childlike, but its meaning was profound. It was Ethan's first true offering of acceptance. That evening, dinner became a milestone none of them would ever forget. On the table was Linda's roasted chicken, a meal Ethan had once refused to touch. This time, he ate heartily, even reaching across to place an extra piece on her plate. David watched, eyes damp, heart overflowing with gratitude. Then came Ethan's voice, soft but clear. "Thank you, Mom, for taking care of me." The words lit the room brighter than any lamp. Laughter rang out around the table, a sound long absent from this home, now flowing like a healing balm. Linda didn't need recognition, but in their eyes she saw it. The unspoken truth that she was no longer the outsider. She had become part of them, not by force, but by love. The silence that once suffocated the walls was gone, replaced by warmth, by trust, by a fragile but undeniable bond. That meal was more than food. It was rebirth. The moment three separate hearts finally began to beat together as one family. In life, we often carry invisible prejudices, especially within the walls of family, believing that true bonds must always be written in blood. But Ethan and Linda's story reveals a different truth, that motherhood is not only born of biology, but also of patience, tenderness, and love given without condition. Ethan once screamed that he would never accept her, swearing she would forever be an intruder in his fractured home. Yet in his weakest hour, when fever left him helpless and she sat faithfully by his side, her love seeped through the cracks of his defenses. When Ethan first whispered the word "Mom," it wasn't just an acknowledgement of Linda. It was proof that the human heart always has room for healing, if only we allow it. The lesson here is simple, yet deeply profound. Kindness and patience can dissolve even the hardest prejudices. And family is not only where we are born, but where we are truly loved. If we dare to open our hearts to set aside judgment and to see one another with compassion, then any house, no matter how broken, can become a real home.